All right, so at 7 o'clock, we'll get started. Um, so kind of this week, we're moving on to chapter 2 of the book, and we're kind of moving on from talking about the history of gaming into more about what makes up a game. What's the basic framework of a game? So we're going to be talking about platforms and player modes and kind of the timer intervals, kind of like the core little things of gaming. So as you see, I've got the my courses open for this week. You'll notice that this week we've got an assignment and we've got a quiz, and let me refresh to see if like the assignment opens. Oh, okay. We'll just switch my view so I can pull it up. So the assignment is basically this week we're going to be talking about different player modes and talking about console systems. And basically we're going to be the assignment talks about the concept of local play, which basically is how you play when you're playing against someone who's on a console. Um, and local play works great when you're on a console, but it can be awkward on computer systems. So you're going to be and this is just basically um, a one page, couple paragraph, maybe one or two paragraphs where you're just going to sit there and discuss um, how you would implement local play on a computer system. And what I mean by local play is if you have two people who are playing a game against each other, how you would implement it using basically a computer system with just a keyboard and mouse. Um, and and as you see with the discussion, it's fairly straightforward. Again, not too crazy of an assignment, but it's just something to get you thinking about player modes on different platforms. And then of course there's a quiz that's based off of straight out, based off out of the reading. So with that, I'm going to move into the lesson. So this week, again, as you see, it's coming straight. This is from the book. We're going to be talking about player and platform and player modes, or what's the framework of games. So the key things that this chapter talks about is what platforms are available for games and what specific elements are associated with each of the platforms. And how does the choice of hardware affect the way a game is developed and played? Because sometimes for specific, if you're creating something for specific hardware, you have to have specific development tools, or you used to, not as much anymore, but with tools like Unity and some of the other bigger game development engines, it's a little bit easier to not have to worry about the hardware on the development side, but you still have to consider it as your how it's going to be played. Then how do modes that are based on the number of players affect the way games are created? Again, this is something that you would be thinking about going into our assignment or discussion question. If you're looking to have a two-player mode on a computer game that uses keyboard and mouse, how do you implement that? Next thing it talks about is what types of platforms and modes are most appropriate for cooperative or competitive styles of play. And then the last thing it talks about is what are time interval options and how do they change the way a game is played? So the first platform is your arcade game. So typically you still find these. There are still some arcades that are around. There seems to be more popping up as people get more into kind of wanting to play the nostalgic games or the classics and stuff like that. But your arcade platform is basically your machine or your arcade machine. Let me switch back over here. Oop, wrong way. There we go. So your next platform is your console. So obviously this is showing at the time of the book the latest greatest, but now we're into two versions ahead of Xbox and PlayStation, and Wii's got different formats between the Switch and the Wii U. But as you talk about it, your consoles are kind of like your systems that initially, when they were first developed, they were hooked up to most likely some sort of TV, and it was all local. It didn't have any kind of connectivity. Obviously, with the introduction of all three of these platforms shown, you also introduced the concept of being able to play games online and be able to do things online as well. Then another platform is computer, and again, a lot of people choose to play games on a computer, where you can use systems like Steam or other things like that. But you can also play a lot of the more popular games just on a PC format. And some people will hook peripherals up to it to have the same types of controllers that you would for a console game, or they just customize their keyboard and mouse to make it work to be able to play better using the keyboard and mouse for movement. So then you also have the concept of an online platform, and the difference with an online platform, like a lot of online platform initially when it first came out, it was primarily based off the PC based games or the computer based games. But as the consoles evolved and the consoles became more powerful, consoles were able to also offer the online platform. You have between the Xbox Live and the PlayStation Store, it's less common for people to go to a physical store or go on Amazon and order physical media for their games. Now using the online systems, you're able to sit there and get your games delivered straight to your desktop as you used to be able to for several years on PCs. So you have the handheld platform, which again, at the time of the book, the more popular was the 3DS and the PS Vita. And the thing about it is 3DS still, the Nintendo products, even the older Nintendo products still have a lot of popularity with people looking to play, just because there were, very well built handheld systems and they had a lot of good gaming options. Even now when you sit there and you look at the Nintendo Switch could be a handheld, or you can hook it up and use it like a console game. But again, it's just a different form of platform. And then the final platform that the chapter talks about is the mobile platform. And again, initially when the mobile platform came out, as you look at some of the models of tablets and phones they're showing, there were limitations. You were limited by the resolution you had. But now as the mobile platform grows, the mobile platform is almost as powerful as the computer platform. You can sit there and you can be playing games online, playing Call of Duty, playing Fortnite, or playing some of these online based games that you could easily be playing on a high-end computer, or playing against somebody who's playing on a phone, and the experience doesn't change between the platform. But the mobile platform, again, at the time you had different development considerations that you had to make for your mobile platform. Even based off the mobile operating system, there was a lot of effects with it. And then the final platform talking about is the tabletop. And I'm going the wrong way. Go back this way. So a lot of people, when they sit there and you think about, since we're talking about video games and we hear the discussion of tabletop, you sit there and you think about, oh, well, this is a tabletop video game, this old style here, or you had the old Pong. They had all different types of games that were like this in this format that were a lot of times you'd see them in bars because they had great places to put your drinks down on while you were playing the game. It was just something to interact, two player games. But when we talk about the tabletop games, we're not talking about anything that is video game or computer related or digital. As you notice, the example it gives is Risk. We're talking about your classic board games. We're talking classic board games like Monopoly, Risk, any type of board game, any type of the newer board games, or your card games like Uno, Phase 10. Basically, when we're talking about a tabletop game, we're talking about a strictly analog game, whether it be board game, card game, some other form that is not digital based. So kind of just kind of to kind of get an idea, I'm going to throw out for you guys to do a little poll just to kind of get an idea of what your favorite platform is, kind of as a way to interact a little bit. Two more people. So I'm just going to stop it because even we're missing one answer on it, but that's okay. So um, so if you should be seeing the results. Obviously, the number one choice right now is computer, and with just the flexibility of the types of games available, with the availability of Steam easily played on the computer and stuff like that, that makes a lot of sense. But kind of going from a development and design aspect, each of these, obviously, a tabletop game has unique design constraints all in itself. But when we're talking about the console, the arcade, the computer, online for computer or console, handheld and mobile, each of these have specific design and development aspects that you have to consider for console. The console, sometimes with the consoles, you have proprietary things and proprietary libraries that you have to use to be able to make sure that if you write a game and you write a game that you want to write and target Xbox, you could very easily do it, but then all of a sudden it gets popular and you want to port it over to PlayStation. That becomes a little bit more difficult because there's certain things that Xbox wants that Sony doesn't want, and there's certain things to in each type of console to even get their games considered for their marketplaces and stuff like that. Like many years ago, a couple of years ago, in the video game programming class I teach, I had a student that was in there that actually he was taking the class, but he had already written a video game that was launched out. At the time, it was available on the Wii U, and he was trying to get it made available for Xbox, and he was having the hardest time. And I spoke with someone I know that works at Microsoft, and they said, Wii U is probably one of the easier platform at the time, was an easier platform to get a game in the marketplace, and that Microsoft, they won't even, like, if unless you're a big developer, they won't even consider your games for Xbox until they sit there and they see that you've launched it into the Windows Store and made your game available on the Windows Store first, because they want to sit there and they want to judge how many people are downloading it, buying it, playing it on PC first before they make it available for Xbox. And it's a way for them to sit there and make sure it's a little bit more stable and stuff. But I found that interesting. One of the things, one of the things that makes developing for your preferred platform a little bit easier is sometimes the development tools you have. Like some of the bigger game development companies will have their own proprietary tools, but a lot of the smaller and indie game development firms will use tools like Unreal Engine or Unity to be able to build their games, because one of the things is you could sit there and you can create the core of the game in one tool where you don't have to do anything special in the building of the game. The tool actually does all the things to be able to make it to where you can target for a specific console, or target for a computer, or target for strictly online in a web-based thing, or even if you want to target for mobile games where you want to launch your game to be available on iOS or Android. The development tool a lot of times helps you in choosing and building for the platform. So I'm going to stop showing the results so we can move forward into the next part. So the next part, when we're sitting there talking about in how games are designed and the frameworks of games, is kind of the time interval. And a lot of time the time interval in particular, it's a concept that not only applies to video games, but it also applies to your analog games, whether it be board games, or as you see here in the picture, you see the example of turn-based game is pool. Well, that, when you're sitting here talking about turn-based game, I mean, basically the time interval is where two, multiple people play, multiple people are playing the game at the same time. There's no restriction on the amount of time necessarily that it takes, but there is, you're not playing all at the same time. You take turns in doing it. For example, in pool, if you're really good and you can just keep on sinking balls, you can take forever on your turn. And then if the next person's not so good and they can't, well, their turn's short. There's no time limit on how long each turn lasts. It's just, it rotates turn to turn to turn. Then the next time interval is real time. And a lot of your sports games are going to be based like that. Like soccer is a real time game where the time is going on there, and your time interval, the time interval for the game isn't necessarily, it's restricted to a specific amount of time, and you're playing in real time as well. All the actions are happening, all the players are playing together. Like if you play an online soccer game, you'll see that, you can play as one player playing against, multiple players, and everybody has their turn at the time trying to play. And the time interval is based off of a real-time clicking clock. And that's kind of what the real-time interval shows. Like a lot of your sports games, your action games, are going to be that real-time time interval. So kind of associated to that real-time time interval is a time limited. Obviously, when you sit there and you talk about soccer is a real-time game where all the action's going into it. Boxing is a real-time game where all the action's going into it. Timed chess is a turn-based game. But the difference is, like soccer could easily be shown here too, because there is a time limit. You have two 45-minute halves in a soccer game. In a boxing match, you have a set number, you could have up to 10 3-minute rounds. In time chess, you have, each player has, even though like boxing and soccer are both time limited real time type games, whereas time chess is a time limited, but it's also turn based, where each individual player has a specific time limit on the amount of time for them to take their turn, as opposed to it being just, you can take forever. So those are kind of just some of the time intervals that are talked about in the chapter for the book. So before moving on, let's move on to, so when playing a game, kind of what's your favorite type, kind of just figuring out what's your favorite type of time interval for a game. Do you like things that are more turn based or real time or time limited? Okay. So obviously everybody seems to prefer real time. One of the big things whenever we're in face to face and we kind of get more into discussions of games we play, I personally have right now, we've got just a PS4 and I've got some computer games. I've got stuff I'll play on my mobile device, but my big collection of video games is I think I've at one point or another, the Madden NFL football, I've owned every version of it since I want to say early 2000s, and I actually even had a version of it that was on the Sega Genesis back when that came out of it. I definitely favor more towards the sports-based games versus some of the other, some of the other games, the first-person shooters and things like that. Did you have a question, Jarrett?
I'm a little afraid to talk, but I was going to ask about those like a rare few like turn-based games where like basically every player uh play every player submits or moves at once, and when everyone locks in, like and the game like plays a simulation to like show how it all turns out. Like I don't know, like Pokemon, I guess, or because of the way turn order works in that game.
See, see, that's kind of like right now. Right now we're talking about kind of like the basics of things, and there's a lot of games that you'll sit there and you'll see like you can see games that are, for example, when it talked about the timed chess is a hybrid of kind of the three things we talk about. It's turn based, but it's also time limit. And there's a lot of games that are kind of like that to where you're playing in a pseudo real time, but it's not really real time because of um like there's games that you play where it's turn based, but they make it look like it's real time because of how they're doing it, because of the online aspect of it. Um it the time intervals kind of get blurred as the as gameplay changes and gameplay evolves. The time intervals, they're not as black and white as it starts, as the book starts showing it being. And the book even kind of addresses as you get into further we dig deeper and deeper into what goes into games. The book will address like the hybrid of different things, and that there isn't just, it's not as black and white as they try to make it seem at first, if that makes sense. I think that kind of, does that answer it?
Makes sense.
Okay.
A lot of the
So
time, it works out like that in reality, where it's not as black as white as the textbook says.
yeah. So the last thing we're going to talk about in here is kind of the player mode for games. So obviously the first player mode we talk about is just your single player mode. And the example it gives is kind of the solitaire game. And solitaire, by definition, solitaire, the name of the game means one player. But basically your single player modes are games that are designed, regardless of the platform, they're designed for one person to play by themselves. So it could be, there's all different types of games that fit into the single player mode, but the main concept is the main design of the game. It's designed for one person to play it all, play all by themselves. Then of course, when you sit there and you get into the next type of player mode is your two-player mode, your player versus player, or in this case, it's showing Streets of Rage 2. And this was where you had two players playing against each other, but they were playing against each other score-wise. But as far as going through the different scenes and the different through the different scenes and the different levels in the games, you were kind of playing against each other score wise, but you're also playing against each other. You're playing with each other cooperatively. Um, but the main thing is, again, the player mode is set up to where it's two players playing the game at the same time, and this is typically in a local player mode. And same thing with the one player. Obviously, with the one player mode, it's going to be in a local player mode. So as you sit there and you look, now we move from the two-player thing into a local multiplayer mode. And the one of the big differences between two-player mode and local player mode multiplayer is when you get into local player mode and two-player mode, typically they're both going to be local. But the biggest difference is your local multiplayer is not limited to just two people. It could be four people if you have a system that supports up to 6, 8, depending on the system. It just basically all involves everybody. It's the concept is more everybody's playing on the same console. Or now with like I've sat there and I've had where we've been at parties and you're playing the using the Jackbox games where you have multiple people and you're still playing local player, but you're not playing on a console. When we played it, we were playing off an Amazon Fire Stick, and we were all using our phones with the app to be able to do it. But the concept is still it's everybody's in the same room. We're not, it's not, and everybody's trying to play off the same system, playing off the same system. So then going back to like, things that happened when like I was in college and stuff like that, was the next big player mode was your land-based multiplayer, where you set up a small or big network where everybody connected, and you either provided the PCs or everybody brought their own PCs, and you connected them and you played massive games of played games against each other, but in a multiplayer mode. But the big thing is that it's land based, so therefore everybody typically was in the same building, connected to the same network. There was no going outside the network, so therefore the speed of the multiplayer ability wasn't limited by your internet speed. It's whatever kind of network you could build. If you could build a screaming fast network with a fast network card, then everybody had that experience. So then that eventually grew into your online multiplayer modes. So now where you're sitting there, and now initially it was on PCs. I remember on PCs dialing in, playing Quake when Quake first had the online ability added into it, and connecting into a remote server and playing Quake against other people from all over in online multiplayer type things like that, to where now you don't even have to sit there, and you don't have to connect your PC somehow to the internet. At that time it was through dial-up modem. There wasn't even any cable modems, but connect your PC to the internet, and then from there you would go and connect to a remote server somewhere to be able to play online. Now it's you're straight in. Actually, there still is remote servers that control the games and stuff like that, but nothing in this realm that it was then. So before we switch over there, so the last poll is, what's your favorite player mode to play games on? Okay. So it looks like we've got everybody's answers. So when you sit there and you look, it's interesting that single player, but not two player, there's two people who enjoy single player games more, two player, local multiplayer, but obviously online multiplayer again is the top answer. And one of the things with kind of with answers like this is a lot of that, as we start going forward in one of the upcoming chapters, when we start talking about not so much what makes up the games, but who plays the games. I believe, I know it's in the first section. Yeah, chapter 4. In chapter 4, we kind of get into the concept of who plays the games, and one of the things is we'll have a lot of discussion about the book will have a lot of discussion about psychographics, demographics, and different things like that make up who plays games, and the reason and why a lot of that's important. And having an understanding, like as you're designing and developing video games, having an understanding of player mode kind of helps you in designing a game. Now, you may be someone who likes single player games, and you're going through to design a game that's built, so therefore you may be inclined to design a game that's targeted towards people who like playing single player mode games. And understanding who your player mode is going to affect what type of game you design and how you go through and design it. There's a lot of elements that you need to build an online multiplayer game that you don't even need for a local multiplayer game. And there's a lot of things for any type of multiplayer game, whether it be just 2-player or local, LAN, or online, that you don't have to worry about for single player. But then again, there may be more AI elements that you have to worry about for the single player because it's a single person playing against possible computer, you know, computer or artificial intelligence type things that you may have to play. In fact, factor in more than you do for an online game where pretty much everybody who's all the characters in the game are associated with a person, so you don't have to worry about artificial intelligence because you have the intelligence of the person playing the game. So we're going to switch out of that, close that. So quick summary of the game is it kind of the chapter is it talks about the different platforms, talks about the different platforms. It talks about whether we're talking console, PC, and things like that. Chapter talks about time intervals and the significance of what the time intervals are, and it talks about the player modes. And one of the things the summary kind of talks about that the slides lead out is at the end of the chapter, there's a one-page section that talks about, let me go to find it here so I can, without saying it basically talks about game elements and what the significance of platforms, intervals, and modes are. And the chapter kind of talks about it. It says, when you're sitting there and you're looking to design a game, me being a professional developer, whenever you're a programmer and whenever you're looking to write a program, your program, even in basics, your program always is looking to solve a problem, it seems. So therefore, when you're looking at the significance of these, as you're looking to design a game, part of the problem that you have to be able to solve to be able to even start moving forward is, what platform do I want to design the game for? Do I want to design a game that's going to be console only? Do I want to design a game that fits multiple platforms? Because that decision, as we move forward into other elements of the game, that the platform you're going to target is going to affect a lot of decisions you make moving forward. For example, if you're playing, if you're looking to make if you're looking to target a handheld, and you're looking to do real-time interval, those would work perfect. You can do something that's a real-time game on a platform that's a handheld, but then you also want to sit there and target it to be local multiplayer. Well, local multiplayer doesn't fit to a handheld as well. I mean, could you imagine multiple people playing on a single, like the Switch will let you do 2-player, but if you're doing a Switch will let you do 2-player real time, but a Nintendo DS won't, or some of the other systems won't. This is the significance of understanding your platform, your time interval, and your player mode, in going through in deciding how your game's going to work. Because deciding to make a local multiplayer game for a handheld or a local multiplayer for a phone, you can do that if it's turn-based, but it may not be as easy to do on a mobile device or a handheld if you're doing to do real time. Those are the decisions and the significance of significance when you're going through and making your design choices for games. And it's kind of, as we're moving forward in each of these chapters, you're going to see that as we move forward, it's building layers upon things of choices that you have to make as you're going through building your games. Obviously, we're at the very basic stuff when you're talking platform, player, time interval, and player mode, because there's so many things that can fall into it, and you have, even when you sit there, like you can sit there and say, I'm going to target this platform, this time interval, and this player mode. As you move forward and you sit there and you start finding out that, well, it's kind of hard to be that concrete, that you may have to be a little bit more flexible, and you have to build things that are a little bit more hybrid. And maybe when you're talking platform, you know, right now I believe the easiest platform to get stuff out on is Steam. Well, you know, that you may sit there and find that, oh, well, that's not so easy out there. And it's actually, you know, the easiest out, you know, platform is an online system. And when I say an online system, meaning, you know, a web-based game where you sit there and as long as you can provide a web hosting provider, you can, but, you know, publish your game to it and have your game available for people to play. You know, it's the things like that that as you're going through affect your choices. So does, let me get out of PowerPoint so that way I can see everything going on. Oh, look, and I got done in record time. So first couple weeks, I'm going to let you know that like I plan and set the class up to be from 7 to 8:30. I'm not going to just babble on about different things. If, you know, if we're done with things, we'll kind of get things, you know, I'll let you guys go early and giving you guys credit, because as we start getting into the more in-depth topics, class will go longer, just so you're aware of it. Like, especially when we get towards the end of the class, when we have guest speakers come in. Like I said, I've got a contact, I've got a friend that when we get talking about sound and talking specifically about sound and using voice in games, I've got a friend that works as a voiceover artist that he gives a very interesting perspective on it. And it's kind of interesting to bring him in just because he's a very interesting person. And then when we start talking about the careers in video gaming, I bring somebody in from the SBC careers department to kind of help you in understanding what's your next step if you're at a point where you're looking to start looking for a career in your chosen aspect of video game design. You know, he comes in and kind of just goes through and talks about how to approach people and how to work towards building the career and stuff like that. So does anybody have any questions? You don't have to mute your mic. You can throw it in the chat and I'll read it as well. So I'm not seeing anybody like showing that they're, so one of the things is kind of, again, there's no assignment is shown with it, but it kind of goes through, you're going to see as we get moving forward, we're actually going to have where we kind of start writing stuff and giving thoughts on the videos. But I've got another video I found from YouTube that's out there that, basically kind of goes through, and it's from a series that this one channel did, that talks about how some of the video games made, and it talks about some of the earlier video games, how the graphics were made, and it kind of gives you a concept of how not only how the graphics evolved, but how the platforms evolved, and the evolution of the platforms led to the evolution of the graphics. You know, it goes into, I believe this video goes into depth of how the graphics were made for Super Mario Brothers, and based off the limitations of the NES, how they took advantage and were able to sit there and make basically a simple set of graphics look more complex than they were, if that makes sense. But it kind of goes, like I said, this is really good video. It's 12 minutes long. I'm not going to play it and make you guys watch it with me while we're online, but it kind of gives you an idea. Nice 12, no more than 12 minutes. And it's very interesting information about the graphics aspects of video games. Later on, I know in the slides it had Streets of Rage 2. When we start talking about sound and stuff, there's a video I have that talks about how Streets of Rage 2 was so cutting edge and how they took advantage of the audio system in the console when it was released, how for backward compatibility they had one audio system, and then for forward compatibility they had another, and basically the creators of Streets of Rage took advantage of both chips to be able to sit there and make a more complex sound than a lot of games had at the time. It's very fascinating. But Um, if nobody has any questions,
Oh, I do.
oh, okay.
Um, okay, I took the quiz and I kept getting one question wrong and I don't know which one it is. So is there a way for us to find out what we got wrong so we can learn from it?
I can go through and look to see, like, look, I don't want to pull it up now because I don't want to have it like pull it up and have wherever, because of my mode, it's kind of like if I go to pull it up, everybody's you see everybody's grades, and I really don't want to share everybody's grades.
Right.
That would be, but I can go in and look, and what I'll do is I can go through and look and see where, like, specifically your quiz, see what questions were wrong, and then kind of share some, send an email out related to it.
Okay, that's fine. And also, I was going to ask, I never saw TurboGrafx mentioned in chapter 1. How does that one fit into all the other rest of them?
I'm trying to think. TurboGrafx.
It's a retro system, was a console.
Trying to think when TurboGrafx were. I'm trying to think where TurboGrafx fit into it. They were.
I think she's talking about the TurboGrafx 16, when it's a PC engine in Japan. If my memory is correct, that would have been under the fourth generation, I think. Is it was contemporary with the SNES and the Genesis.
Yeah. I'll have to let me look through on the book with it. That kind of caught me off a little bit. Let me look through and I'll get you an answer on that. And if I don't,
Okay.
bug me about it.
Well, I can Google it. I was just a little surprised it wasn't in there because I mentioned like all the other systems. So
It's just, again, the book kind of it goes it. I don't know. It stays with some of the more popular ones. I mean, there was other systems that were less popular, other systems that were more popular. I mean, being, like I said, being someone who goes back to having the original Atari 2600 as their first system. And actually, if you watched the video about the lie that built Nintendo, the system that video game that he bought, the fireman with the trampoline, I had that. So I'm dating myself and making myself feel old. And I know I saw somewhat, I'm not going to call them out or anything, but some in the class is in the same age group as me. So I'm not feeling as bad, but
that was me.
But, okay. See, I'm always a gentleman. I won't call out anybody's age except mine. And I'll say I'm old. But with that, I will go through, basically for the quiz, because I'm seeing a couple of people are saying they want to, kind of know what it is. Typically what I'll do, and it's just because the quiz was due right before class started, I'll do it for next week, is I try to, I'll go through and look at the common questions that people got wrong. Cause like there's, I think I forget if this is one of the ones where everybody has if there's a pool of 10 questions and everybody gets 5, or I forget how this quiz is set up. But basically I'll go through and we'll look at the stats and see, okay, 5 people got this one wrong. Let me send out an email and say, okay, here's what the question was. Here's what the right answer is. Here's what the correct answer is. And here's why, kind of give it a little bit of explanation. By the way, if you guys notice, I have a way different background than last week. Like I think and I don't have people talking in the background because I've actually finished my office and moved into my office since, I found out also this week as I was finishing this up that my regular job where work from home through September now, maybe further. So I got to have a place to escape from the busyness of a house with other family members. So if nobody has any other questions, I'll go through and review the quizzes and look for the top answers. And then I'll shoot out an email with basically shoot out an email to the whole class saying, hey, this is one of the questions that Common got wrong. Here's what the question was. Here's what the correct answer is, and here's what the correct answer is and why, and kind of explain it like that. Sound good?
Yep.
Yep. Once we get through the first 4 chapters, there's a lot more meat to talk about. I just don't want to keep rambling on about, I mean, there's only so much you can talk about with consoles, you know, which is generically sitting there and saying consoles versus PC, without getting into the specifics of what type of console and everything like that, you know, and there's another chapter where we'll go deeper into that type of stuff. So, if that's it, we're all set. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm also going to stop